The 10 best artists of the 2020s so far. In my opinion, of course. Yes, once again, I'm delivering some 2020s content for your eyes and ears to witness. And this may in fact be the final 2020 so far video I do on this kind of genre of the decade so far thing I've been doing throughout the year of 2024. We're kind of halfway through the decade-ish so far, and I've been wanting to do some 2020s lists and 2020s videos and 2020s content. But this might be the final one unless I come up with some fresh ideas later down the line, unless you have some ideas that you want to see in the comments as well. Do let me know. But I think we're going to cap it off for now with the best artists of the decade so far. It's not going to be simple though. We've got a few rules to iron out before we get into the list. I want to tell you what I'm using here as my criteria to get you on this list. Yes, you. It could be you. If you make great music, you could be on this list. So make some great music and I might put you on my list. How about that? How about that? Hey, how about that? But the main rules are going to be really artists that are obviously having a great decade. They've had, fantastic music this decade as being the biggest obvious thing. But I think as well, you can't just necessarily be in the conversation for 1 year and then be part of the best of the decade conversation. Like, you can't necessarily just drop one album, for example, and that's it. I think you got to at least drop one album for sure, but then beyond that, you need to have a few years of relevancy. You need to have been in the conversation for multiple years this decade. Perhaps it could be through having multiple albums or EPs as well, that kind of thing, throughout the entire decade so far. That gets you on this list. Are you part of the conversation? Have you had a significant decade so far? Then yeah, you're going to make it on the list. Does that sound okay? I think that just about sums up what I want to mention here. Yeah. Before I get into the 10, these are artists that I think are worth mentioning and very easily could have been in the 10, to be honest with you. You're kind of splitting hairs really here, but I do want to mention Jessie Ware, who I've written down. Jessie Ware's had a great decade so far, her biggest decade, the best music she's put out this decade, and also the most popularity and success she's had, which is for great to see. I want to mention Vince Staples. Very unfortunate also not to make this list, but he's had a few good albums this decade so far, as well as one this year. Also want to mention Beyonce, who's putting out probably her best music of her career at this point. Very unfortunate not to make the list as well, but being this good late into her career is just ridiculous. There's so many pop artists die out and don't put out the music of the caliber of when they were really at the peak of their career, like Beyonce's doing. She is quite one of a kind. And there's still the third act of the Renaissance trilogy to come. And I'm sure that one's going to be good too, to be honest. So yeah, this could change in a few years, because if that's as good as the first one and Cowboy Carter, she's got to be in the actual official list. She's really close. And then finally, Jack White. I think he's had a great decade so far as well. Kind of redefining his career, bringing back the kind of old aesthetics of the White Stripes that made them so successful, made them so exciting. Also unlucky not to get on this list because I think the 2 albums he's put out, there was that third one as well, which was pretty good. But the 2 main ones he's put out have been stellar, because the other one was just like an acoustic version of Fear of the Dawn, wasn't it? Which was fine. It was all right. But yeah, Fear of the Dawn and No Name, stellar albums. Very unlucky to not make this list. But in no particular order, we're going to run down the 10 artists of the decade, in my opinion. I want to see what you think in the comments. Do you agree? Disagree? Whatever. Let me know. Tell me your list as well. Let's go. Starting off with Little Simz. It's just stellar stuff this decade, man. I mean, her best album by a landslide. Sometimes I Might Be Introvert is just so fantastic, so phenomenal. I've waxed lyrical so many times on this channel about this album. I feel like I'm always talking about this album because it's just that good, and kind of is getting better over the years as well. More years pass by, the more I think fondly of this album. I loved it when it came out, but it just seems to keep getting better somehow. It's ridiculous. Love it. And then of course the album that came after, which isn't really as conceptual or as as grandiose or as theatrical as Simbi, but it's still really good, and it's just showcasing how good she is at just spitting bars, choosing beats that just work so well for her voice and her flows. Angel's fantastic, Gorilla's fantastic. Just 2 really strong albums for the decade so far. She recently landed on a Coldplay song, which is insane, really, but you know, that doesn't really add to this list, to be honest with you, because I don't think the song's that great. But it's just nice to see that she's kind of making her way up and slowly rising. I think there's going to be a point where she is like more of a household name in the conversation of UK hip hop, because at the moment she's just kind of a tier below that. But yeah, I think she's really working her way up. It's stellar stuff. Yeah, she's got to be on here. Want to mention Magdalena Baynex, just having such a stellar decade as well. They've probably dropped the most music on anyone of this list because they've got the two excellent albums that they've got under their belt, you know, Mercurial World, and of course the one that they've only just recently dropped, Imaginal Disc, which is absolutely fantastic. And then a bunch of EPs as well. They are just always dropping music of really good quality that I think is just some of the best pop music out there at the moment. Like, yeah, I know they're not huge, they're not mainstream names, but that's not what it's always about. They're just so good at creating earworms, creating really catchy, fun music, and just developing their output in such a great way, to the point where we're at now an album of the year contender as of recording this video, of course, which is, you know, September right now, so we're too early to be calling anything album of the year yet, but it's certainly a contender. Just incredible stuff. I think they are really like an inch away from getting some kind of viral meme or viral moment. They're really good on social media. They're really good at visuals and aesthetics. I just find what they do to be so pleasing. I find what they do to be so exciting and engaging. Yeah, love what they do. Just incredible work so far. I'm mentioning Kendrick Lamar as being in the conversation of artist of the decade so far. Yes, I know what you're going to say, but remember what I said at the start of the video. One album is at least enough, but you need to be relevant for multiple years in the decade to be part of this. So I'm not being inconsistent. My criteria, he fits perfectly. He's got Mr. Morale, but he's been one of the biggest names of 2024 so far through the beef with Drake, which just created an incredible cultural moment that just feels like it needs to be included in the criteria for him on this list. Because how can you not mention Kendrick, man? Like, this year's just been incredible, winning the beef in the way he did, creating all these incredible songs to go along with it as well. And then Mr. Morale in 2022, which is a total opposite end of the spectrum of what he was doing this year, which was so hateful and vitriolic and villainous, really. He was a friggin' supervillain in this beef, let's be honest with you. We have to be honest with ourselves. We have to be honest, he was a supervillain. But then in 2022, completely opens up to the world, shows us why he's not the Messiah. He's a flawed man. He's the everyday person that has made, you know, many mistakes, been unloyal and cheated on his lady, and just putting all that out there. These aren't things to commend him on. I don't really like people who cheat on their significant others, as most people don't. What a hot take, guys. I don't like cheaters. Can you believe it? I know, what a hot take. How good of a person am I telling everybody? Wow. Just bow down to me right now, guys. I don't like cheaters. Whoa. And that's not what we're praising on here, of course. I think just being such a mainstream figure in the world of music, putting that out there, showing the world that your heroes are flawed, and in such a beautiful way, and growing from that too. You know, the amount of people that would do that in the world and not grow or change or learn from the things that they've done and swear blind that they never did anything wrong. You'd be surprised. There are some people that are very in denial about their characteristics and the things they do. And I think what Kendrick Lamar showed us on the album is that, yeah, he's been this messiah figure in the world of hip hop for so long, but he's not, and he is flawed, and he's not perfect. And yeah, it creates such a great album that I think is underappreciated and may need time for people to look back on that and not just call it boring, which you keep seeing in discourse all the time. I think people did start to grow appreciation from when Drake completely like kamikazed himself in the beef. I think people did start to go back to Mr. Morale and think, actually, you know what, this is a good album. So yeah, great artist from this decade, of course. He's having just such a great year. I couldn't not include him. Natalia Lafourcade has had a prolific decade so far with lots of releases, the part 1 and part 2, part 1 being my favourite album of 2020 completely, so that kind of pushes her in this conversation just through that. And then, of course, the album from, was it 2023, last year? Yeah, of course, that was a fantastic album too. Some people call it her best. I'm not sure if I fully agree with that, but I still think it's close to being in that conversation. I just love her discography, so it's really hard to just kind of pinpoint what is her best album when she has so many amazing ones. Hasta la Raíz from 2015, I think that one. Yeah, that's up there in the conversation too. Yeah, just love what she does. I like how kind of weirder and more experimental, I guess, she got on the more recent album. It just showed a different side to it, showed a darker side to it, showed a in a more brooding fashion that felt the music shift in how it feels and how it sounds in such a cool way. Yeah, great stuff from her. I think in the Western sort of like English speaking language world, I guess you could say, the kind of typical English speaking world, she's not really getting the appreciation that she truly deserves. But, you know, in her home country, she's absolutely beloved there. So yeah, I think she's deserving of being in this conversation. It's Anderson .Paak. It's Anderson .Paak. He gave us Silk Sonic with Bruno Mars, and he gave us No Worries with Knowledge. And to not even have a solo album this decade and be on this list just shows how good he is, really, doesn't it? It just goes to show how friggin' fantastic this guy is. Because both these albums coexist in his career, and they're very different, really. I mean, the Bruno Mars Silk Sonic collaboration just really rocketed him to success that he deserved for years, but hadn't quite got. I think Bruno Mars helped him kind of get that. But of course, Anderson .Paak was always a beloved, respected artist before that album. He just hadn't had number ones or anything like that. But of course, he gave us that one. The quality of the music still remains really high too. It's got this retro throwback sound to it that doesn't sound gimmicky. It doesn't feel like it's just pastiche. It could easily feel that way, but I don't think it became that. And then, of course, on the flip side, not a mainstream release whatsoever, not an album that's had any kind of massive accolades attached to it. No Worries, Why Lord, which tops the original that they gave us years ago, in my opinion, as well. Just a really strong decade from Anderson .Paak, in my opinion. And that's before he's even given us a solo album. When that solo album drops, oof, he would be cemented in this conversation if it's as good as these albums here. Next, I want to mention Porter Robinson, who's having an amazing couple of years with his last two albums, which I think are quite easily his best albums so far. There is that beloved cult-like following he got for Worlds, which is pretty good, but I think what he's doing right now has just elevated his career to a totally new level for me, where I've just been so impressed with it. Nurture is absolutely wonderful. It's spellbinding at points. It's just got a really, really stunning sound design that just makes for such a beautiful listen. And I think it's his best album so far. But then with this new one from earlier this year, Smile, we've got like a totally new side to him where he's just giving us like really fun, quirky, off-kilter type pop music, which I just, again, find to be super enjoyable, super likable. It has this charm to it, which I think is really fun, and yeah, just puts him in this conversation for being one of the best artists of the decade. In terms of like versatility and complete night and day difference between the two albums he's got as well, really showcases two totally new sides to him, which I think is really great. Yeah, love what he's doing. I think he should be in many people's lists for this, because those albums, man, what's Sent Out to Love? Charli XCX. Charli XCX, Jesus Christ, How I'm Feeling Now. You had Crash, which is considered a low point in her career, but honestly has some pretty good songs on it. And then you've got Brat, which is basically the highest point of her career so far. Of course, when she first started out, she had a few hits. She had some really massive features. But I think Brat is like Charli's moment. And it's so cool to see something like become so culturally significant after years of just being kind of under the radar. You know, she hasn't really been a talking point for a long time. She's been loved by people who've been paying attention. You know, she's kind of like a Carly Rae Jepsen type figure who started so high up, dripped a little bit down and kind of dipped further under the surface, but just kept dropping albums that everyone was like, just friggin' listen to it. It's good. I'm telling you, it's good. It's not in the charts, but it's all good. And that's Charli's career for like the past 7 years, really. And yet now she's burst back through with quite possibly her best album. Like, it really is that good. It's great to see. It's become such a meme. It's become such a cultural force on social media, and the music hasn't sacrificed anything. If anything, it showed us who she really is and showed the authentic Charli that has been there for a long time. And yeah, authenticity wins, I'm afraid, guys. It's starting to win in the mainstream, and Charli is a good example of that. And then How I'm Feeling Now, which I haven't even barely mentioned, but that's a great album, and I think up until Brat came out was her best album as well. Yeah, what an album that is. Just kind of captures the lockdown aesthetic so wonderfully. It's the lockdown album for me. I don't think any other album quite captured that feeling of just wanting to break free, get back out into the world, feel the heat and the sweat of people in busy places, because we lost all that, and she captured that really well on that album. Yeah, wonderful stuff. Charli is killing it right now. One of my favourite artists at the moment has got to be Gene Dawson. Loving what he's doing this decade. He's got 2 fantastic albums under his belt. I think his more recent one is actually a bit underrated, and I might even say was better than the previous album that he put out, which was fantastic as well and got a bit more buzz. But yeah, loving what he is doing. I think his style of rock music, this youthful, exuberant energy that comes through, just really brings out this kind of like bringing you back to your teen years, that kind of like rebellious energy that comes out, but everything just feels so anthemic. Everything's just so enjoyable. The music's just fantastic. He's got such a great style. I think he's actually had a bit of influence on some artists already, because I think Tizo Touchdown is really pulling heavily from what Gene was doing, and Tizo became massive, which good for him. I don't want to bring down other artists to pull up somebody else, but yeah, I mean, god damn, Gene should be getting as much popularity as he's gotten, because I don't think Tizo would have made that album without Gene existing first. So yeah, and then that Kevin Abstract album that came out as well, which sounded almost identical to what Gene was doing. Come on, man, put this guy higher on the pedestal and give him more success, because he's been fantastic. I want to mention Tyler, the Creator, who, again, like Kendrick Lamar, hasn't had multiple albums this decade, but he's had multiple years of relevancy, which gets you on this list based on my own personal criteria. But of course, there was the 2021 Called Me If You Get Lost, which is fantastic. And then 2 years later, he gave us deluxe tracks for it, which felt like a brand new project, even though it is a deluxe. But it didn't feel like they were just tacked on, because the quality of the songs were that good, and it just brought Tyler back into the conversation of being one of the best rappers around right now, because of how consistent he's been for so long. Yeah, so those tracks are ridiculously good, and also the album itself was great too, so that's why he's getting on this list for me personally. But it's not even only just that. I mean, he's also been on multiple features as well this decade. You know, he did that Freddie Gibbs one. He's got the track with Maxo Cream, Big Persona, which I think is pretty underrated. A track that I don't see enough people really talking about. But yeah, I think, you know, collectively with everything he's done this decade with features and his own releases, I think he's in the conversation. He's probably going to drop next year too, if that's good. Then you can't really argue with him being on the list. But as I said, multiple years of relevancy gets you on here. If that's not how you want to make your own list, then that's absolutely fine. But it's how I'm making mine, and Tyler gets on. And the 10th and final pick is Parannoul. Parannoul, man. I'm just so blown away by the quality of the music this man puts out. It's only one guy. He's become the new Tame Impala, where you're just like, do you know this is one guy? Because you just wouldn't think it, with how much noise and atmosphere and just how the music crescendos and everything just feels so huge. It's just ridiculous how good this is. I was really impressed with last year's album. It was on my year-end list after The Magic. Thought that was absolutely fantastic. But then, this one from this year, I just can't believe it. Like, it just elevated everything that happened on that album to a new level, and it's just like, wow, mind-blowing stuff. Absolutely adore this thing. Absolutely adore what Parannoul's doing. I just think, yeah, for an artist making this good music and being still kind of niche and not really well known. It's just kind of mad. But I know this music wouldn't necessarily be for everybody anyway, but I love it. I think Parannoul is having a fantastic decade so far and deserves to be on the list. And maybe if I'd done this list a month ago, he wouldn't have been on it because that album hadn't been out yet. But now the album's out, it's a no-brainer that he had to make it on this list. As I say, it's no particular order. He's not 10th. He's not the last pick. He's on this list and he deserves to be here with everybody else too. Amazing stuff. And that is it from me. These are the 10 best artists of the 2020s so far, in my opinion. Let me know who I missed off, because there will be loads of artists that I do agree with and I will be on board with, but I could only pick 10. So it is what it is. But let me know what your 10 picks would be. Would love to see in the comments what your list is. And yeah, if you agree with mine, disagree with mine, if you're new here, please make sure you follow. Let me know in the comments what you think. Like the video, share it around. Check out my Patreon if you're feeling really generous. Would love that. Have a good day and goodbye.